Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Tolkien Reading Day reader,
Tolkien Reading Day reader, JD.
Welcome to our Tolkien Reading Day special for 2026. In commemoration of the anniversary of the destruction of the One Ring, the Tolkien Society picks a theme each year and encourages Tolkien fans to celebrate by reading passages relating to the theme on this day. This year, the theme is Unlikely Heroes.
I instantly thought about hobbits for this theme, but there are some good passages which I don't want to spoil for you until we get to them one day in our read-through.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be sticking to passages that we have already covered or that don't contain any significant spoilers for you. Since this is Tolkien Reading Day and not Tolkien Analysis Day, we will try to keep our commentary to a minimum and just focus on bringing you Tolkien's own words. Recently, we covered Frodo's conversation with Gandalf in Bag End. Let's read it again in the context of this theme.
So, Frodo now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside. Lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. "I cannot read the fiery letters," said Frodo in a quavering voice. "No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this in the common tongue is what is said, close enough. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." It
is only 2 lines of a verse longer known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie.
He paused and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it." Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered, "how on earth did it come to me?"
"Ah," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story. The beginnings lie back in the Black Years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again, and left his hold in Mirkwood, and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again."
"I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "as do all who lived to see such times. But it is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance."
Then, skipping ahead in the conversation a little bit.
There was a long silence. Gandalf sat down and puffed his pipe, as if lost in thought. His eyes seemed closed, but under the lids he was watching Frodo intently. Frodo gazed fixedly at the red embers on the hearth until they filled all his vision, and he seemed to be looking down into the profound wells of fire. He was thinking of the fabled cracks of doom and the terror of the fiery mountain. "Well," said Gandalf at last, "what are you thinking about? Have you decided what to do?"
"No," answered Frodo, coming back to himself out of darkness, and finding to his surprise that it was not dark, and that out of the windows he could see the sunlit garden. "Or perhaps yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me." "Whatever it may do, it will be slow to evil if you keep it with that purpose," said Gandalf. "I hope so," said Frodo, "but I hope that you may find some other better keeper soon. In the meanwhile, it seems that I am a danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Bag End, leave the Shire, leave everything and go away." He sighed. I should like to save the Shire if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagine that as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me, and I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small and very uprooted and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible.
He did not tell Gandalf, but as he was speaking, a great desire to follow Bilbo flamed up in his heart, to follow Bilbo and perhaps to find him again. It was so strong that it overcame his fear. He could almost have run out there then and down the road without his hat, as Bilbo had done a similar morning long ago. "My dear Frodo," exclaimed Gandalf, "hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all there is to know about their ways in a month, yet after 100 years they still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you." But Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought how important it would prove.
Frodo, arguably the central character of The Lord of the Rings, is himself an unlikely hero, only finding himself in this situation because he was named Bilbo's heir.
Yeah, I definitely have talked a lot about that, too.
Yeah. Next up, we will read the scene where Éowyn fights the Witch King.
But lo, suddenly in the midst of the glory of the king, his golden shield was dimmed. The new morning was blotted from the sky. Dark fell about him. Horses reared and screamed. Men cast from the saddle lay groveling on the ground. To me, cried Theoden. Up, Eorlingus, fear no darkness. But Snowmane, wild with terror, stood up on high, fighting with the air, and then with a great scream he crashed upon his side. A black dart had pierced him. The king fell beneath him. The great shadow descended like a falling cloud, and behold, it was a winged creature, if bird then greater than all other birds. And it was naked, neither quill nor feather did it bear, and its vast pinions were as webs of hide between horned fingers, and it stank. A creature of an older world maybe it was, whose kind, lingering in forgotten mountains, cold beneath the moon, outstayed their day, and in hideous eerie bred this last untimely brood, apt to evil. And the Dark Lord took it, and nursed it with fell meats, until it grew beyond the measure of all other things that can fly. And he gave it to his servant to be his steed. Down, down it came, and then folding its fingered webs, it gave a croaking cry, and settled upon the body of Snowmane, digging in its claws, stooping its long naked neck.
Upon it sat a shape, black-mantled, huge and threatening. A crown of steel he bore, but between rim and robe naught was there to see, save only a deadly gleam of eyes, the Lord of the Nazgul. To the air he had returned, summoning his steed ere the darkness failed, and now he was come again, bringing ruin, turning hope to despair and victory to death. A great black mace he wielded, but Theoden was not utterly forsaken. The knights of his house lay slain about him, or else mastered by the madness of their steeds were borne far away. Yet one stood there still, Durnhelm the Young, faithful beyond fear, and he wept, for he had loved his lord as a father. Right through the charge Merry had been borne unharmed behind him, until the shadow came, and then Wynfula had thrown them in his terror, and now ran wild upon the plain. Merry crawled on all fours like a dazed beast, and such a horror was on him that he was blind and sick.
King's man, his heart cried with him. You must stay by him. As a father you shall be to me, you said. But his will made no answer, and his body shook. He dared not open his eyes or look up. Then out of the blackness in his mind he thought that he heard Durnhelm speaking. Yet now the voice seemed strange, recalling some other voice that he had known.
Begone, foul Dwimmerlake, lord of Carrion, leave the dead in peace. A cold voice answered, Come not between the Nazgul and his prey, or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of lamentation beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured, and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye. A sword rang as it was drawn. Do what you will, but I will hinder it, if I may. Hinder me? Thou fool! No living man may hinder me. Then Mary heard of all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Dernhelm laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn I am, Eomund's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone if you be not deathless, for living or dark undead I will smite you if you touch him.
The winged creature screamed at her, but the Ringwraith made no answer and was silent, as if in sudden doubt. Very amazement for a moment conquered Mary's fear. He opened his eyes, and the blackness was lifted from them. There, some paces from him, sat the great beast, and all seemed dark about it, and above it loomed the Nazgul lord like a shadow of despair. Little to the left, facing them, stood she whom he had called Dernhelm, but the helm of secrecy had fallen from her, and her bright hair, released from its bounds, gleamed with pale gold upon her shoulders. Her eyes, grey as the sea, were hard and fell, and yet tears were on her cheek. The sword was in her hand, and she raised her shield against the horror of her enemy's eyes.
Eowyn it was, and Dernhelm also, for into Mary's mind flashed the memory of the face that he saw at the riding from Dunharrow, the face of one that goes seeking death, having no hope. Pity filled his heart, and great wonder, and suddenly the slow-kindled courage of his race awoke. He clenched his hand. She should not die, so fair, so desperate. At least, she should not die alone, unaided. The fear of their enemy was not turned towards him, but still he hardly dared to move, dreading lest the deadly eyes should fall on him. Slowly, slowly he began to crawl aside, but the black captain, in doubt and malice, intent upon the woman before him, heeded him no more than a worm in the mud.
Suddenly the great beast beat its hideous wings, and the wind of them was foul. Again it leaped into the air, and then swiftly fell down upon Eowyn, shrieking, striking with beak and claw. Still she did not blench, maiden of Rohirrim, child of kings, slender but as a steel blade, fair yet terrible. A swift stroke she dealt, skilled and deadly. The outstretched neck she clove asunder, and the hewn head fell like stone. Backward she sprang as the huge shape crashed to ruin. Vast wings outspread, crumpled on the earth, and with its fall the shadow passed away. A light fell about her, and her hair shone in the sunshine. Out of the wreck rose the Black Rider, tall and threatening, towering above her. With a cry of hatred that stung the very ears like venom, he let fall his mace. Her shield was shivered into many pieces, and her arm was broken. She stumbled to her knees. He bent over her like a cloud, and his eyes glittered. He raised his mace to kill.
But suddenly he too stumbled forward with a cry of bitter pain, and his stroke went wide, driving into the ground. Mary's sword had stabbed him from behind, shearing through the black mantle, and passing up beneath the hauberk, had pierced the sinew behind his mighty knee. "Eowyn, Eowyn," cried Mary. Then tottering, struggling up, with her last strength she drove her sword between crown and mantle, as the great shoulders bowed before her. The sword broke, sparkling into many shards. The crown rolled away with a clang. Eowyn fell forward upon her fallen foe. But lo, the mantle and hauberk were empty. Shapeless they lay now on the ground, torn and tumbled, and a cry went up into the shuddering air, and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind, a voice bodiless and thin that died and was swallowed up, and was never heard again in that age of this world.
So this passage shows Eowyn as an unlikely hero, not only because she is a woman on the battlefield, but because of the despair in her heart. Denethor is in a similar situation and despairs, and he immolates himself, but Eowyn despairs and becomes a hero instead.
And Mary is also an unlikely hero. The Witch King completely ignored him the entire time because he was so unlikely a hero. I
also like to point out a great thing about this is sometimes, like, it's contagious too. Like, Eowyn standing up gives Mary the courage, or if not the courage, then at least, for feeling bad for her standing alone, the will to go and do something about it.
It's a great point. Neither one was a hero by himself.
Right.
Finally, let's take a look at the scene of Samwise the Brave fighting Shelob. I first need to ask that my Elvish pronunciation be excused.
Double for me, and even sometimes my English pronunciation can be a little rusty.
Frodo was lying face upward on the ground, and the monster was bending over him, so intent upon her victim that she took no heed of Sam and his cries until he was close at hand. As he rushed up, he saw that Frodo was already bound in cords, wound about him from ankle to shoulder, and the monster with her great forelegs was beginning half to lift, half to drag his body away. On the near side of him lay, gleaming on the ground, his elven blade where it had fallen useless from his grasp. Sam did not wait to wonder what was to be done, or whether he was brave or loyal or filled with rage. He sprang forward with a yell and seized his master's sword in his left hand. Then he charged. No onslaught more fierce was ever seen in the savage world of beasts, where some desperate small creature, armed with little teeth, alone, will spring upon a tower of horn and hide that stands above its fallen mate.
Disturbed as if out of some gloating dream by his small yell, she turned slowly, the dreadful malice of her glance upon him. But almost before she was aware that a fury was upon her greater than any she had known in countless years, the shining sword bit upon her foot and shore away the claw. Sam sprang inside the arches of her legs, and with a quick upthrust of his other hand stabbed at the clustered eyes upon her lowered head. One great eye went dark. Now the miserable creature was right under her, for the moment out of the reach of her sting and of her claws. Her vast belly was above him with its putrid light, and the stench of it almost smote him down. Still his fury held for one more blow, and before she could sink upon him, smothering him and all his little impudence of courage, he slashed the bright elven blade across her with desperate strength.
But Shelob was not as dragons are. No softer spot had she, save only her eyes. Knobbed and pitted with corruption was her age-old hide, but ever thickened from within with layer on layer of evil growth. The blade scored it with a dreadful gash, but those hideous folds could not be pierced by any strength of men, not though elf or dwarf should forge the steel, or the hand of Baron or of Turin wield it. She yielded to the stroke, and then heaved up the great bag of her belly high above Sam's head. Poison frothed and bubbled from the wound. Now splaying her legs, she drove her huge bulk down on him again. Too soon, for Sam still stood upon his feet, and dropping his own sword with both hands he held the elven blade point upwards, fending off that ghastly roof, and so Shelob, with the driving force of her own cruel will, with strength greater than any warrior's hand, thrust herself upon a bitter spike. Deep, deep it pricked, as Sam was crushed slowly to the ground. No such anguish had Shelob ever known or dreamed of knowing, in all her long world of wickedness. Not the doughtiest soldier of old Gondor, nor the most savage or contrapped, had ever thus endured her, or set blade to her beloved flesh. A shudder went through her. Heaving up again, wrenching away from the pain, she bent her writhing limbs beneath her, and sprang backward in a convulsive leap.
Sam had fallen to his knees by Frodo's head, his senses reeling in the foul stench, his two hands still gripping the hilt of the sword. Though the mist before his eyes, he was aware dimly of Frodo's face, and stubbornly he fought to master himself and to drag himself out of the swoon that was upon him. Slowly he raised his head and saw her, only a few paces away, eyeing him, her beak drabbling a spittle of venom, a green ooze trickling from below her wounded eye. There she crouched, her shuddering belly splayed upon the ground, the great bows of her legs quivering, as she gathered herself for another spring, this time to crush and sting to death. No little bite of poison to still the struggling of her meat, this time to slay and then to rend. Even as Sam himself crouched, looking at her, seeing death in her eyes, a thought came to him, as if some remote voice had spoken, and he fumbled in his breast with his left hand, and found what he sought. Cold and hard and solid it seemed to his touch, in a phantom world of horror, the phial of Galadriel.
Galadriel, he said faintly, and then he heard voices, far off but clear, the crying of the elves as they walked under the stars in the beloved shadows of the Shire, and the music of the elves as it came through his sleep in the hall of fire in the house of Elrond. Gilthoniel, Elbereth, and then his tongue was loosed, and his voice cried in a language which he did not know. Elbereth Gilthoniel, Omenel Palandiriel, Linalan si Dinguruthos, Tiro nin Fanwilos. And with that he staggered to his feet, and was Samwise the Hobbit, Hamfast's son, again.
"Now come, you filth," he cried. "You hurt my master, you brute, and you'll pay for it. We're going on, but we'll settle with you first. Come on and taste it again." As if his indomitable spirit had itself potency in motion, the glass blazed suddenly like a white torch in his hand. It flamed like a star that, leaping from the firmament, sears the dark air with intolerable light. No such terror out of heaven had ever burned in Shelob's face before. The beams of it entered her wounded head and scored it with unbearable pain, and the dreadful infection of the light spread from eye to eye. She fell back, beating the air with her forelegs, her sight blasted by inner lightnings, her mind in agony. Then, turning her maimed head away, she rolled aside and began to crawl, claw by claw, towards the opening in the dark cliff behind.
Sam came on. He was reeling like a drunken man, but he came on, and Shelob, cowed at last, shrunken in defeat, jerked and quivered as she tried to hasten from him. She reached the hole, and squeezing down, leaving a trail of green-yellow slime, she slipped in, even as Sam hewed a last stroke at her dragging legs. Then he fell to the ground. Shelob was gone, and whether she lay long in her lair, nursing her malice and her misery, in the slow years of darkness, healed herself from within, rebuilding her clustered eyes, until with hunger like death she spun once more her dreadful snares in the glens of the mountains of shadow, this tale does not tell.
So this exchange is the quintessential example of a hobbit rising to the role of an unlikely hero. He accomplished what no strength of men could accomplish.
He's compared to heroes of the first age, Beren and Turin, and then, as if to highlight how unlikely a hero he is, we are reminded that he is, in fact, Samwise the Hobbit, Hamfast's son.
Yeah, that line definitely was my favorite part of the whole passage, where it's you can almost feel it's right after the Elvish too.
Yes.
So it almost feels like for a second he was like out, almost like not out of his mind, but like just inhabiting a different mindset, and then he clicked into who he was, you know.
His tongue was loosed, and his voice cried in a language which he did not know, unlike my tongue.
Yes, I thank you for sparing me from trying to pronounce any of that Elvish.
So how do you feel about your second Tolkien reading day? Did you like getting to read some Tolkien?
Yes, yeah, it was exciting to kind of skip ahead and read some of the more action-based parts. Although I think the best example was the one that we already covered in the main podcast at this point, with Frodo choosing to take the journey.
Yeah.
But it was really fun to see how Tolkien handles the action. It feels very epic, for lack of a better word.
I agree.
Poetic and old-fashioned, which is what I would expect.
These are a couple favorite passages of mine. We wish all our listeners a happy Tolkien reading day, and I wish to part with some of Elrond's words from the council. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
A special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey, and thank you for listening.